Hi, this is a follow-up to my earlier 10 dead genres video, and it's aimed to try to fill in the gaps, so to speak. Once again, I'm excluding all indie games, as within the realm no genre will ever cease to exist. And good, cause they shouldn't. And I'm focusing on mainstream games only. So let's jump straight in. Where better to start a video like this one than with the text parser adventure games. As a subset of all adventure games, they were already on a very steep decline since the early 90s, and the popularization of more user-friendly, and let's not kid ourselves here, better point-and-click interfaces were the proverbial last nail. And while I hate text parsers with the passion of an older gentleman complaining at the restaurant about his cold soup, I cannot deny the importance of this at the time, and more importantly, the quality of some of the releases. I mean, those of you old enough will know exactly what I'm talking about when I will mention these two names. Two major players, and in their time, giants in their shared genre. Infocom in the mid to late 80s and Sierra Online from late 80s to early 90s. The first was basically a pioneer in the genre, and its initial few releases had literally no graphics at all, or just a few odd splash screens here and there to liven up the walls of text-comprised gameplay. Spartan looks, however, were not an issue at the time, as gamers were captivated by the stories Infocom was telling, by the choices that they could make, and by the fun that they were having. Sure, using your imagination as a graphic card to draw all the slush environments and deep characters may not have been ideal, but at least it meant that their games could have better graphics than any system at the time could offer. Imaginary perhaps graphics, but better nonetheless. The fact that these games were largely little more than interactive books didn't bother anyone circa 1985-ish, or so I heard, and they quickly became very popular. Infocom eventually added real graphics to their titles and even moved into full-fledged point-and-clickers, but that's not a subject for today's video. Now, Sierra Online on the other hand, most definitely is. If there's one company that I have nearly as much respect as I did for LucasArts, it was definitely Sierra. Even if we exclude all the other genres that they dabbled in, they were a powerhouse on a parser adventuring scene. And some of the best games in the genre came directly from them. I mean, all the Heroes Quest, Police Quest, Leisure Suit Larry and Space Quest games started off with you maniacally typing in commands to see what the game will do with them. Sometimes it was fun, sometimes it was sad, and from time to time, even deadly. Given that the Sierra made the point of making sure that their games would have animated graphics, the adventures that Sierra took us on were one of a kind and unforgettable experiences. Even if we were to only consider the few titles that I just mentioned, they were so spread in their themes that anyone could find an adventure game from Sierra and have a lot of fun with it. Heroes Quest was a fantasy adventure mixed with role-playing elements, which was a very novel concept, and not only for then, but for many years after. Police Quest allowed you to learn how boring it could be to be a cop, with all the procedures and such, but also how exciting it could get too when solving those tough cases. Larry Laffer was your everyday lovable loser who paradoxically was unable to find love despite his best efforts. Well, efforts, let's not go overboard with that best thing there. And finally, Space Quest was a sci-fi comedy game that had us laughing out loud at Roger Wilco, an unlikely janitor turned hero, and all the troubles that he got himself into. So as you see, Sierra knew what they were doing. And while their games often included a lot of stopgap devs, which annoyed me beyond belief I tell you, I cannot deny them the honor of probably being the single most important developer in the entire text parser adventure games genre. Genre that's here no more. Do you know which games have definitely fallen off the radar in the last decade or so, and we barely ever see mainstream releases of them these days? Hyperspeed sci-fi racers. You know those games where you drive/pilot either a hovercraft or some kind of a futuristic car on long bendy stretches at incredible speeds. I mean, everyone remembers all the wipeouts and how big of a deal they were, especially those still made by Psygnosis. They were a breath of fresh air in the by then a tad stale pack of standard racers, as they turned the entire main racing genre upside down. In case of some of the titles like Roll Cage, quite literally upside down. They somehow managed to mix speed, fun and action of arcade racers with skill-based simulators. They had their entry threshold set quite low for everyone to be able to jump in ad hoc and enjoy it, but in the same time reward those who learned and mastered their controls and were technically and skill-wise superior to most Sunday gamers. I mean, sadly, I was not the best at any of them, but a buddy of mine at the time was like a video game racing machine. If you gave him a copy of Wipeout, F-Zero, High Octane, POD or whatever the else in the genre and a day to practice, the next day he'd be running circles around computer-controlled drivers with his eyes closed. Well, driving laps, not running circles, and eyes squinted and not closed, but you know, potato potato, tomato tomato. Still, it was an odd to explain pleasure to witness such a skill at play, and probably the closest thing that I could compare it to that I can think of was watching sports. And yeah, I don't watch sports at all, as they bore me to death. and him mastering these games I could somehow really enjoy. Anyway, while these ultra-fast games differed considerably from one another, with some featuring weapons and power-ups, while others banked on pure racing skills, they all had one thing in common: addictiveness, whether you cared for the genre or not. Keep in mind that I play RPGs, turn-based strategies, management games and cinematic adventures near exclusively, but when I got one of these in my hands, I usually obsessed over them for a week or so before coming back to my usual titles. That's how good they are, or that's how good they were. Because outside of the obvious indie scene, we barely ever get games like that today, which is both surprising and disappointing. It's surprising because unlike some obvious understandably dead genres like the aforementioned Parser adventures, hyperspeed sci-fi racers, when coupled with a pumping soundtrack, could potentially do very well, especially that they're perfect choice for streaming. They're nowhere to be found, and we're left with perhaps great, but still rather old titles only. In the early 90s, someone came up with the idea of mixing popular at the time platformers with a bit less so, but still well-liked puzzlers, and poof, the puzzle platformers genre spawned into existence. Like an unexpected fart, they became reality, and their presence, even if accidental, was definitely unquestionable. It's difficult to say with 100% accuracy what game was the first, but it's not difficult for all of us to agree that when they were done well, by talented folks, and based on a good idea, they could be some of the most fun gaming experiences ever. I mean, there were so many of them released between when they first appeared on the market and mid-2010s when they quietly went away, that I couldn't list them all here, even if I gave them this entire video. I mean, let's look at two sample games spread in the release time by over 15 years, The Lost Vikings and Trine. First gave you a control of free beer drinking and rather rowdy Vikings, each with their own set of skills, and a huge-ass adventure through time where you had to conquer dozens of large puzzle platforming levels, utilizing their unique abilities to beat them. You could switch between them at will, and often had to use more than one at the same time in different parts of the level to figure out the solutions to various locks, switch puzzles or traps. It was hella fun, and the game is beloved by those who played it to this very day. Released in 2009, Trine on the face value seems like something entirely different. But as soon as you give it a go, you'll realize that while it's set in the fantasy and not Norse themes, and features a lot of physics-based puzzles, it's virtually the same game, because you still have to figure out solutions to different platforming problems using unique characters. But why am I talking about near-identical, only newer game here, you may wonder? Cause Trine was a natural evolution of the idea behind Vikings and a progress in video game design. And I don't even mean the puzzles largely relying on accurately simulated physics that was a big thing back then, but the fact that Trine could be enjoyed by a few people at once, each controlling one character and playing at the same time. And I don't have to tell you that while some games are purely single-player experiences, others are best with friends, and puzzle platformers are a perfect example of the latter. Another fun title worth mentioning when crying about a dying genre is Braid. I don't know how many of you know it or of it, but it was a very fun and unlike anything else at the time game that changed the way we look at video game design forever. Namely, it based its entire gameplay on the time manipulation mechanic. It allowed you to rewind time at any moment and for as long as you wanted to. You could even go back to the very beginning of the level. Why? Well, because some stages required you to actually die, sometimes more than once even, so that you could rewind time and then use deaths of those clones of yours to be able to complete the level. Sometimes you'd use them to die by engaging the enemy to clear a path for your rewinded in-time second self, sometimes to create either higher jumping or platforming opportunities, or to be in a few different locations at the same time, doing different things at once. The idea was borderline genius, and we've seen many games modifying and using the gimmick since, was the first to do it so well. While it could be argued that Braid was an indie release, as technically speaking it was, it gained such a huge popularity and became such an incredible hit at the time that I'd say that it outgrew its roots and bloomed into the mainstream. When looking at the older games again, however, one step beyond comes to mind too. It's a simple, mostly single-screen puzzle platformer in which each level requires you to do seemingly one simple thing only. Close all of the platforms by jumping on them and always end up on the one that's designated as the very last. So, not only it demanded that you do all the hopping in the right order, but you'd also needed to figure out how to properly utilize special effects that each of the different platforms had on your character and other platforms around them. So some may switch on or switch off other platforms, some may launch your character far, and there's quite a few others, all with their own fun to figure out mechanics. And learning all about them is nearly as fun as it's using the knowledge later to beat increasingly demanding problems. Puzzle platformers are a near-dead genre, which is a huge letdown to me, as despite them usually being a bit less technically advanced to those more special effects-packed ones, like first-person shooters for instance, they were near always on the forefront of creativity and gameplay design. Do you remember Silent Service 2, Aces of the Deep or M1 Tank Platoon games, or even whichever of the Red Baron's F-22s or AH-64 Apache games? I mean, there was a time when we used to get non-online military simulations like every other month or so. And yeah, I get that the reason for the genre's demise may be the online offshoot, and especially all the Battlefield, World of Tanks, World of Warships, War Thunder, and even crossout games, but I don't always want to play against others. Especially because it may require dealing with the queues, then with grieving and constantly complaining teammates, toxic teens with egos bigger than Mount Everest thinking that they're smarter than anyone else, or even in some of these titles, having to wait for the match to end after being prematurely killed off before being able to play again. Sometimes I just want to launch the game, pick a mission and get on with it. Also, as fun as these new titles may be, they don't cover all the machines we used to be able to simulate back then. And the games like World of Tanks can hardly be called simulations. They're FPSs with tanks, ships or whatever else that they cover, and nothing more really. Don't get me wrong here though, I like them, I really do. They're just not an appropriate replacement to the genre now gone. I remember spending dozens of hours in Aces of the Deep, playing for the wrong side of the conflict and hunting allied ships all over the ocean. And it was hella fun. And especially that the game didn't rush me, I could literally waste away real-life hours under the surface trailing a convoy at my own pace, waiting for the best moment to strike, or even save the game, leave and come back when I had more time to attempt a particular mission or will to try to beat that one that I kept failing at. Same goes for all the tank, helicopter, fighter, bomber, historical or any other kind of military simulations. I want to take them at my own pace and learn them as I go. I really don't mind the online component at all, for as long as they offer fulfilling single-player campaigns and will allow me not to have to log in and go through all the hassle every time I have a passing urge to drive that tank or bomb something. And please, do not clip this out of context, I know how terrible it sounds. Anyway, my point here is that games in the non-online military simulations genre are so sparse these days that you can probably count all that came out in the last decade using fingers alone. And if you wanna focus on those that were really good, then one hand will be more than enough. I'm not gonna lie here, I may not be the target audience for these, as for whatever the reason I only ever really loved submarine simulations and others only played occasionally, but if you were a fan of these, I'm sure that you will agree that today the genres on life support at best and long dead and zombified into occasional questionable quality release at worst. While we still get rhythm mechanic including games in the A and AA realm from time to time, like the pretty darn solid 2023 Sci-Fi Rush, they are few and far between, and pure music-centric titles are nearly non-existent outside of sporadic indie releases. Which, don't misunderstand me here, do count, but I've deliberately decided to ignore indie games for these videos. So, sometime between the 1996's rather cute and low-key brilliant PlayStation 1 release of Parappa the Rapper and the mid-2010s, music games had the renaissance and countless titles graced our consoles and PCs. Two particular series have been the biggest of them all, Guitar Hero and Rock Band. Both of these featured tons upon tons of mainly rock and metal licensed music tracks, which also means that most of the footage that you're watching is muted. You know, for YouTube reasons. Their biggest appeal, however, was the inclusion of instrument-shaped controllers. And while Guitar Hero with its initial release supported a guitar only, eventually both sported a whole set of instruments, so a lead and bass guitars, drums and vocals. And this along with their very party-centric multiplayer, in which small groups of friends would play together, each on a different instrument no less, or vocals, meant that the game skyrocketed into popularity quite fast and spawned countless sequels. Literally all of them topping the popularity charts. And you know what? I really appreciate what they did back then, because they've kept the local and offline multiplayer for a little while longer, and friends spending time together face to face. Or guitar to drums, you know what I'm saying. Naturally, as the time went by, online gaming squashed most couch/local multiplayer into near non-existence, and even such giants as these two failed to stay relevant. But they were not the only games representing the genre, and we've received more similar and equally as fun titles, even if they did not base their gameplay idea on simulating a real live band anymore. One of such titles is a personal favorite of mine from years ago, Audiosurf. It was a PC-only release and it was fantastic. It took your own library of music tracks, you know, MP3s that everyone used to religiously hoard on their hard drives for whatever the reason, and based on their tempo, melody and rhythm, created wipeout-like tracks of them. With a gimmick that you did not race against other hovercrafts, but had to hit the correct notes, same as in two earlier mentioned iconic music titles. The idea of Audiosurf was so simple, so basic, it was hard to believe that no one came up with it before, but the gameplay, boy oh boy, now that was a dream. It was simple to understand and demanding to master, and as difficult as the tracks you used for it. So the more melodic and slower the song you've picked, the more approachable the track would be, and the faster and more aggressive the tune, the more twisted and challenging the race became. It was spectacular. But same as with Rock Band and Guitar Hero, time and rapidly progressing technology killed off audio surf along with the entire subgenre. Would I like to see music games genre return to the former glory? I think most of us would, but do I believe that it will ever happen again? Well, I've made this video and that should be the answer enough for you, as sad as it may be. I hope that you found this supplemental release to the original video as fun as I did talking about these no longer with us genres. It's a pity that they don't exist in the same capacity as they once did, and that the chances for them resurfacing again are lower and lower with each passing year. But it's worth keeping in mind that within the indie realm, no genre is ever really dead, and we can still find similar titles to all of these games releasing from time to time as indies. They may operate on a much smaller budget and offer simpler presentation, but the fun factor is all there, and hardly any big developer, short of select few, like Obsidian for instance, will ever be as creative as the indie devs are. I mean, they have no corporate overlords over them pushing them to aim for the quote-unquote what sells best and can work on what's fun to play. Anyway, that's all for me for today, and I'll be sure to invade your subs box very soon. If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below, and maybe share it too, it helps more than you know. If you didn't, then don't naturally. It was fun talking to you as usual, and I'll see you, or more accurately, talk to you very soon.